snow drifted like ghostly lace across the Wyoming plains, swallowing the horizon in white silence. The road was little more than a frozen scar through the land, and the wagon creaked along it like an afterthought of summer. Inside, a woman sat very still, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the frost gathering along the window frame. Her name was Clara May Hensley, and the chill outside had already found its way into her bones long before winter came. Her father sat hunched at the reins, his breath fogging the air. He didn't look at her. He hadn't since they left the family farm that morning. Every jolt of the wagon seemed to echo the quiet shame between them, an unspoken understanding that she was being traded, not wed. When the black outline of the Boone Ranch appeared against the gray sky, his shoulders stiffened. The ranch looked like a memory half erased by snow, a barn sagging under its own weight, smoke thin as thread rising from the chimney. A man stood by the gate, tall and still as a post. His coat was worn but clean, his eyes shadowed by a hat brim dusted in frost. Silas Boone, widower, rancher, the man her father had found to take her in. No one spoke when the wagon stopped. The only sound was the wind brushing through the brittle grass. Her father climbed down, boots crunching, and extended a folded paper, a deed, a contract, a quiet betrayal. Silas didn't reach for it at first. His gaze flicked toward Clara, and for a moment she thought he saw her, truly saw her. The humiliation under her stillness, the exhaustion hiding in her spine. Then, wordlessly, he nodded. "That'll settle it," her father said, voice sharp with relief. He turned toward the wagon without farewell. The wheels groaned as they rolled away, leaving Clara standing in the middle of the yard, her shawl fluttering like a ghost's flag. She didn't cry. She didn't call after them. Only the wind spoke, carrying her name into the barren distance. Silas finally stepped forward. "Come inside," he said simply. His voice held neither pity nor warmth, just quiet instruction. She followed him through the threshold into a small home that smelled of cedar, smoke, and something faintly medicinal, as though grief had a scent of its own. A single photograph rested on the mantel, a woman holding a child, both long gone. Clara stood awkwardly near the door, afraid to move. The floorboards creaked like they were whispering secrets about her presence. Silas set 2 mugs on the table and poured tea with steady hands. Steam rose between them, softening the air. "I can work," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll earn my keep." He didn't look at her. "Work's not what I bought, Miss Hensley." His words were even, deliberate. "A name was all I asked for." The statement struck her like a cold wind. A name, nothing more. She nodded and sat when he gestured to the chair. They drank in silence. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted, whistling low through the barn eaves. She felt it in her chest like a sigh that couldn't find release. That night, she lay awake in the small side room he'd prepared. The bed was clean but cold. The house groaned with the weight of the storm. Somewhere down the hall, she heard Silas moving, slow and heavy, as if haunted by footsteps he no longer expected to follow him. She turned toward the wall, closed her eyes, and promised herself she would not be a burden. Morning arrived muted and gray. She rose before dawn, lit the stove, and began sweeping the hearth, uncertain if she was allowed but unwilling to sit idle. When Silas entered, he paused, watching her quietly. "You don't have to," he murmured. "I'd rather do than sit," she replied. He nodded once, and that was that. Days stretched into weeks. Clara worked from dawn to dusk, tending chickens, patching worn curtains, mending fences when the cold allowed. The rhythm steadied her heart. She said little, and so did he. Yet there was a strange comfort in that quiet, a kind of respect in silence that words might have spoiled. When she walked into town for supplies, whispers followed her like trailing ribbons. Evelyn Harrow, the seamstress with kind eyes and cruel lips, was the first to murmur, "Boone took that Hensley girl in, the Barren one." Some men just can't stand an empty house. Clara didn't flinch, didn't correct her. Shame had long since become her second skin. She walked home slower that day, the gossip clinging to her like frost. That evening, she sat on the porch while the snow fell thick as down. Her breath came in faint clouds, her fingers numb even beneath the wool gloves. "Even the earth won't take seed from me," she whispered into the night. The words tasted of iron and sorrow. Inside, Silas paused mid-step. He had meant to close the shutters, but instead watched her from the doorway. After a long silence, he placed a lantern beside her chair. "You'll catch cold," he said simply, and returned inside. She stared at the lantern's soft halo for a long time, her throat tight with a strange gratitude. Each day after that, something unspoken grew between them, thin as thread, strong as silence. He never asked about her family. She never asked about the faces in the photograph. Yet every gesture carried meaning. When he mended the handle of her broom without mention, when she left an extra biscuit beside his plate. The house began to feel less like a holding pen for ghosts and more like a place breathing itself back to life. One evening, as another blizzard began to gather, the wind slammed the barn doors open. Clara rushed outside, skirts whipping around her, to find a calf collapsed in the snow, its thin body trembling violently. She knelt beside it without thinking, her bare hands trying to rub warmth into its hide. The cold bit through her fingers until they turned white. A moment later, strong arms lifted the calf from her lap. Silas stood over her, snow tangled in his hair, breath coming in clouds. "You'll freeze out here," he said, his tone sharper than usual. But when she tried to protest, he only shook his head and carried the animal toward the barn. She followed, teeth chattering, heart hammering. Inside, the lantern light cast everything in gold and shadow. Together they spread blankets over the calf and coaxed life back into its shaking limbs. Hours passed in near silence, except for the animal's soft, struggling breaths. When the calf finally stirred, Clara smiled, small, fleeting, but real. Silas looked at her then, truly looked, as though realizing she was not just a stranger left at his door, but a woman stitched together by endurance. "Clara," he said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken her name. The sound of it broke something open inside her. She turned away quickly, hiding the tears that rose without warning. They sat together until dawn, the barn filling with faint warmth. She watched him cradle the calf's head with rough tenderness, and thought how strange it was that a man so strong could move with such care. By morning, the storm had passed. The sky hung pale and empty, and the air smelled clean again. She walked back to the house ahead of him, her shawl fluttering around her shoulders. For the first time, she didn't feel like an intruder in that silence. A week later, she received a letter. The handwriting was her father's, familiar and sharp. Inside, a single line. "Heard Boone's got a ranch worth twice what we thought. You best convince him to send more for all we lost giving you away." Her stomach turned to ice. That evening she burned the letter in the stove. The paper curled inward, blackening into ash. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let tears fall. She told herself the flames could devour memory as easily as paper. Silas entered the room quietly. He didn't ask. He only stood beside her, watching the fire dance, his expression unreadable. For a moment, his hand hovered near her shoulder, but he stopped himself and instead set her teacup down. Freshly filled, the steam rising like forgiveness. From then on, he began leaving small tokens of kindness without word or explanation. A patched glove, a sprig of pine in a vase, an extra log on the fire before dawn. She answered in her own quiet ways. A meal left warming for him, his boots cleaned by the door, the steady hum of a song from the kitchen. One night, she found herself laughing softly at something Tobias from the general store had said earlier. The sound startled her. It had been so long since laughter felt natural. Silas looked up from his chair, eyes flickering in the lamplight. He didn't smile, not exactly, but something in his expression softened like snow melting on stone. Outside, the world remained cold and watching. The gossip didn't fade, but it mattered less with each passing day. Clara had begun to recognize a strange dignity in surviving, the quiet rebellion of simply staying. When the last of winter's storms rolled across the plains, Silas stood by the window, his gaze lost in the horizon. "You've thawed what I thought was gone," he murmured, almost to himself. She pretended not to hear, but her hand trembled slightly as she poured the tea. The house felt warmer that night, not from the fire, but from the fragile, unnamed thing breathing between them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft, relentless, forgiving. It covered every scar, every footprint, leaving the world smooth again. And though the night pressed close against the windows, Clara no longer feared the silence. It was the first winter in years that didn't feel endless. It was the first time she dared to think that perhaps, somewhere beneath all that cold, something was beginning to bloom. The winter began to loosen its grip, though the mornings still woke wrapped in frost. The light outside the Boone ranch grew less pale each day, but Clara still rose in the dark, her movements quiet as prayer. She had learned to listen, to the creak of the boards, the sigh of wind through the eaves, the soft rhythm of another human presence nearby. There was comfort in that silence now. It no longer pressed on her. It breathed with her. One gray morning a distant shape emerged through the mist, a rider bent low against the wind. By the time he reached the porch, Clara had opened the door. It was Sheriff Kincaid, his coat heavy with ice, his gloved hands clutching something wrapped in wool. Beneath the folds lay a boy, no more than 12, lips blue, skin white as the drifts that buried the road behind him. "Found him out near Coyote Pass," the sheriff said, voice rough with cold. Family wagon overturned. No one else made it. Silas appeared at her shoulder, and together they brought the child inside. For 3 days the house filled with the fragile scent of fever and herbs. Clara sat by the boy's bedside, wringing cloths in cool water, whispering lullabies from some far-off memory. Silas moved through the house like a ghost, fetching wood, brewing tea, always near but never intruding. The boy's breathing stuttered like a clock running down. On the 4th night, his fever broke. When his eyes opened, pale and frightened, Clara smiled so softly, it felt like a secret shared with God. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're home." He didn't answer, just stared at her with a look too old for his small face. Silas leaned in the doorway, watching the two of them. Something unfamiliar stirred in him, a warmth both welcome and unbearable. Later, when the boy slept, he asked quietly, "You've cared for a child before?" She shook her head. "Only in dreams." Her words hung there, gentle but heavy. He turned away, pretending to check the fire, and she wondered if he understood what she hadn't said. That to nurture someone was both a longing and a wound. When spring threatened to return, the boy began to laugh again, small bursts of sound that startled the quiet rooms. He followed Silas around the yard, trailing his questions behind him like dust. Clara watched from the window, hands still damp from washing dishes, and felt a strange ache that wasn't quite sorrow. The townsfolk, however, noticed everything. Whispers coiled through the store aisles and church pews. "Boone's raising orphans now? With her?" Evelyn Harrow's voice carried furthest. "First a barren wife, now a borrowed son. Maybe she's trying to build herself a family from scraps." The words reached Clara before the week ended. They always did. That night she sat outside again, the stars sharp and cold above her. Her breath came slow, steady. She didn't cry, but when Silas joined her, the quiet between them felt thinner than it used to. "They don't know what they're saying," he murmured. "They know enough to hurt," she replied. He nodded, gaze fixed on the horizon. "Let them talk. The wind dies quicker than gossip." His calm steadied her, though it didn't mend the bruise those words left. She wondered if he ever regretted letting her stay, if the weight of her reputation had become his to carry. 2 nights later, the peace broke. A knock rattled the door just after sundown. 3 men stood on the porch, faces flushed with whiskey, eyes mean with certainty. Clara knew one from the store. He smirked as he looked her over. "Evenin', Boone," he drawled. "Heard you've been running a charity out here. Shame a man like you can't find a woman proper enough to bear him a name." Silas didn't move. "Go home. Come now," the man pressed, stepping closer. "You bought her, didn't you? Don't mean she's worth the keep." His friends laughed. Clara froze where she stood, shame and fury rising together until she couldn't tell which would spill first. The sound of the blow came before she saw it. Silas's fist, clean and silent, cracking against the man's jaw. He fell into the snow, blood blooming red across white. The laughter stopped. For a moment no one breathed. Then the men dragged their friend upright and stumbled away, muttering threats lost to the wind. Silas stood there, chest heaving, snow gathering on his shoulders. Clara's voice broke the stillness. "You shouldn't have." He turned toward her slowly, a smear of blood on his knuckles. "You don't defend what doesn't matter." "I'm not worth that," she whispered. He stared at her a long time. "You don't see it yet," he said quietly. "But you were never the debt." Her throat tightened. She wanted to answer, but no words came. He stepped past her into the house, leaving only the sound of the wind to carry what neither of them could say. The next morning, she woke early, as always, but found him already outside splitting wood. The rhythm of the axe was steady, almost meditative. She made breakfast in silence and left it warming by the stove. When he came in, he nodded once in thanks. That was enough. Days passed. The snow melted, revealing the color of earth again. Tobias, the boy, followed Clara now, helping with chores, laughing at small things. Each time he smiled, something inside her unfurled, cautious and trembling. She never called him son, but her heart did. Then one afternoon, Evelyn Harrow came to the door, holding a bundle of cloth and a look that didn't match her usual sharpness. "For the boy," she said softly. "Outgrown clothes from my sister's." Her eyes lingered on Clara's face, uncertain. "Don't listen to what's said in town. Folks talk because they're afraid to feel." Clara thanked her, though she didn't know how to believe it. After Evelyn left, she sat for a long while by the window, turning the folded shirts in her lap. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and regret. That evening, when Silas returned from the pasture, She told him what Evelyn had said. He listened, arms folded, expression unreadable. She mentioned something else, Clara added carefully. Said she heard you once told someone you didn't want children again, that all you wanted was peace. Silas's jaw tightened, then eased. She's not wrong, he said. The quiet that followed was sharp enough to cut. Clara felt her breath catch. All this time, she said slowly, I thought you pitied me, for what I couldn't give. He looked at her then, eyes steady, voice low. No, Clara. I needed someone who saw life in what's left, not in what's lost. For a long moment, neither moved. The fire crackled softly between them, and outside, the first flakes of another snowfall drifted down. She turned toward the window, tears catching the firelight. You make peace sound like a kind of love, she whispered. Maybe it is, he said. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind pressed gently at the shutters like an old friend. She rose, walked to the boy's room and found him burning with fever again. His small body trembled beneath the quilt. Panic bloomed sharp in her chest. She called for Silas. Together they worked through the night, cooling his skin, feeding him broth, whispering reassurances that felt too fragile to reach him. At one point, she realized her hands were shaking and Silas's were steady, and somehow that steadiness kept her from breaking. Hours blurred into dawn. Tobias's breath came shallow, then deeper, steadier. When at last his fever broke, Clara collapsed into the chair beside him, exhaustion and relief tangling in her throat. Silas knelt beside her, his hand hovering before it finally settled over hers. You were never barren, he said softly. You've kept this house alive. Her eyes met his, wide and wet. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his gaze that felt like sunrise. Quiet, unhurried, certain. She pressed her forehead against his chest, and the rhythm of his heartbeat felt like the sound of coming home. By noon, the boy was sitting up, pale but grinning. Clara fed him soup while Silas mended the shutter Tobias had kicked loose in his fever dreams. The house smelled of broth and cedar and something sweeter. Hope, maybe, or belonging. In the following days, spring crept softly into the valley. Snow melted into rivulets that shimmered through the pastures, carrying the world's thaw with them. The ranch no longer looked haunted. It looked lived in. Tobias ran ahead through the fields, chasing the wind. One morning, Clara and Silas walked the fence line together. The earth was soft beneath their boots, the air full of the scent of wet grass. She watched him as he paused to adjust a post, the sun glancing off his hair. For the first time, she didn't see a man haunted by ghosts. She saw one who had decided to keep living. Behind them, the house stood quiet and solid, smoke curling from its chimney. Evelyn Harrow's voice drifted faintly from the road as she passed, not unkind. Maybe love ain't about what you lose, but what you stay for. Clara smiled, the words settling somewhere deep. Silas glanced at her, and though neither spoke, their joined silence felt like a promise. Later that evening, she sat by the window with Tobias asleep in the next room. The sky glowed violet, and the sound of crickets rose like a lullaby. Silas joined her, 2 cups of tea in hand. They drank without words, the warmth seeping through their fingers. Outside, the land that once seemed endless and cruel now felt like something tender. A world reborn from cold. She leaned her head against the window pane, watching the reflection of the fire behind them. In a town that measured worth by what could be borne, she murmured, we found something else. Silas looked at her, waiting. Grace, she finished. He reached out, covering her hand with his. The silence that followed was not empty. It was whole. When she finally looked away from the window, her gaze caught on the small snowdrops blooming by the fence line, white as forgiveness. For the first time, she believed they might stay, and somewhere in that soft, endless quiet, the old soul of the story whispered to whoever might listen. Love does not always begin with want. Sometimes it begins with what endures. The fire crackled, the world outside shimmered with thawing light, and the Boone Ranch, once built on loss, now breathed like something alive. If this tale touched your heart, remember, love is not the child of perfection, but of endurance. Sometimes the truest family is the one built from broken pieces that still choose to belong. Subscribe for more Wild West tales, where hearts heal slower but deeper.